I'm going to give them a 9 out of 10. Actually, I'm going to give them a 10 out of 10. I think even if they lose to the Chiefs in a Super Bowl, I think it's an outstanding season from then. I think most...
It's a miracle! Oh, yeah! What about that one? Unbelievable! Balotelli, Aguero! Crowd cheers. Here's Siddle. Oh, the ball is close! He's given him! He's given him! Taylor Siddle's got a hat-trick on his birthday!
Hello and welcome back to the On The Ball podcast. This is episode 103 of the show, and we are back again to talk about the NFL. As I promised a few weeks ago that before, I wasn't sure whether to do it before or after, but before the Super Bowl, I was going to do a playoff review. So not necessarily reviewing the actual playoff games, but reviewing the season of the playoff teams, as I touched on the teams that missed out on the playoffs a few weeks ago. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to go in order of elimination. So who got eliminated in the first week, we're going to review their seasons, and the second weekend, and so on and so forth. We're just going to talk about each team, about who stood out for them, who had great years, what areas let them down in the field, and we'll just chat about their season, really give each team a rating out of 10, and we'll just see how we go. In terms of future NFL episodes, this is probably going to be the last episode addressing the 2020 season. Then we're probably going to do an episode discussing each team's needs in terms of the draft and trades and free agency. But then after that, it's probably going to be a bit of a break before we kick on with 2021 NFL content. So savor it while it lasts. But it's been really enjoyable commenting on the 2020 NFL season. But first of all, we've got the Indianapolis Colts, the first team that were kicked out of the 2020 NFL playoffs. They lost to the Buffalo Bills by 3 points. They went 11-5. I predicted them to come first in their division. They came second, but they weren't too far off the Tennessee Titans. They were only, they were actually finished on the same record. They just missed out on tiebreakers. They had an alright year. Their defense was obviously the highlight, as we would have expected with them. I think the Phillip Rivers signing was better than, me personally anyway, was expecting. I really have only gotten to NFL the last few seasons, so what I thought of Phillip Rivers wasn't that, I didn't think that highly of him. But obviously we saw this year that he had a pretty good year. And that turned out to be a good free agency signing. It will be interesting to see where they go next with the quarterback position, whether they bring him back on for another year or whatever. Other guys who had great years for them, their O-line was good once again. Quentin Nelson, Ryan Kelly both made all-pro teams. And then in terms of the defense, their new signing, DeForest Buckner from the Niners, he made the all-pro team, and so did Darius Leonard. And then they had a couple guys on special teams. Xavier Rhodes also had a pretty good year. He was a pretty good pickup from the Minnesota Vikings. Their probably biggest letdown, Jonathan Taylor had a pretty good rookie year. He started slow, ended up probably the way I was expecting his season to go. Their wide receivers was a little bit of a letdown. Hilton was slow early, got going. Pittman showed glimpses, but there was no real standout number one receiver for them. And that potentially let them down, but they just were a pretty good side all round, and they never looked like doing too much damage in the postseason, but I think they had a pretty good year. In terms of a rating out of 10, if 5 is average, I'm going to give them I actually don't know. I'm actually going to be generous to the Colts. I'm going to give them an 8 out of 10. I did predict them to come first in the offseason. They had a pretty big offseason in terms of signings and stuff like that. But the fact that they went 11-5 and they were 3 points off beating the number 2 seed Buffalo Bills, I think they had a pretty good year. So I'm going to give them an 8 out of 10. Pretty generous. Probably deserve a 7 or a 6, but why not start it off kindly? Next up, we've got the Seattle Seahawks. Probably won't spend too long on each team because we've got 14 teams to get through, if my maths is correct. They were the number 3 seed in the NFC. I predicted them to come second in their division. They came first. They finished 12-4. Their defense was a big letdown. When you talk about the Seahawks, it's pretty hard not to mention that straight away. They had the 26th ranked pass rush and the 24th ranked secondary, so that was a huge letdown. Bobby Wagner and Jamal Adams were highlights in that poor defense. Wagner made All-Pro. Jamal Adams also made the second team All-Pro. Sometimes I do think there's a lot of selections based on just the name factor. I think those two might have been recipients of that, but Adams did have quite a lot of sacks. DK Metcalf also made the second team All-Pro. Their offense was pretty good. Believe it or not, that was almost the thing that let them down in the back half of the season, which is not what we would have expected. They went down to the Rams in the first weekend. Always a tough matchup for them, the Rams, because they're so strong in defense, where Seattle kind of relies on putting 30, 35 points plus on opponents to win games, where the Rams aren't just going to let you do that every week. So Seattle, not a great matchup with the Rams, which is frustrating because they do play them twice a year. Russell Wilson had a pretty good year. He came out of the blocks in sensational form, looked like winning an MVP, but he slowed down a little bit towards the back end of the year. Him and Kyler Murray almost had symmetrical seasons in the fact that they came out so strong and then slowly died off. Running backs, still an issue for Seattle. They had a lot of issues there, and no one really stood out as the number one. Carlos Hyde had a couple good games. Chris Carson had a couple good games. But they probably need to sort that out in the off-season. But Lockett, Metcalf, Wilson, there's always something to build around there. Solid O-line, ranked 14th according to PFF. So apart from running back and a little bit of work on the defense, hopefully some of their younger players start to produce a bit higher quality footy. And all of a sudden they could be a real threat in next season's postseason. In terms of out of 10, look, 12-4... I'm going to give them I'm actually going to give them a 5 out of 10. Pretty harsh, I'd have to say. 12-4 is a pretty impressive record, but the fact that they had little to no impact in the postseason was pretty disappointing after how much they promised at the start of the year. Next up, we've got the Washington football team, the number 4 seed in the NFC, lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers by 8 points on the first weekend. They finished 7-9. Everyone knows why they were there. It was because of the NFC East low quality this year. They had a fairly tough schedule, actually. The NFC East didn't play the easiest of teams, but they got a few scalps in there, the Washington football team. They beat the Steelers, they beat the Niners, and they smashed the Cowboys twice. So they had a few good wins in there, but ultimately they didn't have too much impact on the postseason, but I don't think anyone was expecting them to be there in the first place. I predicted them to come fourth in the NFC East. I think most people would have. Let's be real though, they were only, I think, 1 win off fourth, so it wasn't an outrageous prediction from me. But PFF is pretty fond on this team. They had the 6th best O-line, 5th best pass rush, 7th best secondary, so they're obviously doing a lot right. The big issue with Washington is probably the quarterback position, but apart from that, everything's looking pretty good. Their defense was elite. Chase Young looked like as good as we were expecting. Their D-line across the board is great. Terry McLaurin looks like a superstar. Even Steven Sims showed glimpses at some points. Logan Thomas was awesome. Antonio Gibson was great. JD McKissick was awesome. So now they just need to answer the question mark of who's their QB. They had Haskins. They had Taylor Heineke. They had Alex Smith. Haskins is gone now. Alex Smith and Heineke are still there. They could draft one, so there's a lot of questions going there. But it's ultimately been a huge year for them. And out of 10, I think I'm going to have to give them a 9 out of 10, to be honest. Pretty perfect year for them. I don't think it could have gone any better. Yes, it would have been nice for them to sneak a playoff win in January, but I think that would have been asking a bit too much, given the fact that we were predicting them to come last in their division anyway. Next, we've got the Tennessee Titans, the number 4 seed in the AFC. They went 11-5. I predicted them to fall a little bit from last year. I expected them to come 3rd in the AFC South, and they exceeded that by winning the division. But, I don't know, they're a tough team to analyse this year because they were scoring a lot of points and they were dangerous teams at times, but their defence was just so bad, they never really looked like posing a big threat in the postseason. They just regularly shipped a lot of points. I think they shipped 30 plus points on 7 or 8 occasions, which just isn't good enough. Especially when you build yourself as a ground and pound team like they do with Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry made the All-Pro side once again. had the most rushing yards by like 500 or something. Absolutely dominated that. AJ Brown continued his dominance. Corey Davis came to the party this year, had a great year. Ryan Tannehill had another pretty good year. Their defense was just awful though. 31st in pass rush. Their secondary was okay, but still not great. But yeah, the pass rush is a big issue for them. They brought in, I think it's Vic Beasley. I think they brought him in from the Falcons, and they also brought in Jadeveon Clowney, and neither really had an impact for the Titans. So that's definitely something they've got to address. But in terms of this season, I think given the back half of last season's form, this is probably about what we expected. So if I'm going to give them a rating out of 10, I'm probably going to be harsh and say just above average, and I'll give them a 6 out of 10. No impact on the playoffs, but an 11-5 season, division winners, definitely an above average season, but yeah, still room to work on for the Tennessee Titans. Next up, we've got the Chicago Bears. They were the number 7 seed in the NFC. I predicted them to come second in the NFC North, and they successfully did so. Well done to me. That was a tough division to predict this year. They went 8-8, which is probably a little bit under par for what they were expecting, but when you've got quarterback issues, it's always hard to be a dominant side. They didn't have too many big scalps, if I'm honest. I'm looking at who they've beat now. Their best win was probably against the Buccaneers on, I think that was a Thursday night. They beat them by 1 point, and apart from that, they kind of just beat the teams they should have and lost to the teams you would have expected them to lose to. So nothing outrageous from the Bears this year. A pretty stock standard year. Their defense was once again awesome. Pass rush was 4th best in the competition. Secondary was top half. Their O-line needs fixing. They kind of found their rhythm at the end of the year. Montgomery was starting to eat meters on the ground, but their pass protection still needs to improve. Their coaching, yeah, look, who knows what's going on there. Hopefully they can bring in someone better next year and address that. Matt Nagy's still there, but hopefully they can sort out the play calling. And yeah, just in terms of the Foles-Trubisky situation, it's a pretty sticky one. I think they're going to move forward without Foles, and they're going to look for Trubisky and someone else, but there's rumours of Trubisky leaving, there's rumours of Foles staying, so who actually knows what's going on there. But they found Montgomery this year. He turned into a beast at the end of the year. That's a positive. Their defence was great. Their receivers, there's question marks there, but Darnell Mooney had a pretty good year. Anthony Miller, probably below par, but in Robinson, Miller, and Mooney, if they can hold on to Robinson, they've got a pretty good trio there. Cole Kmet looks decent. Jimmy Graham was okay. They just need to find a quarterback, pretty similar to the Washington football team, actually, Chicago. Next up, we've got the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Pittsburgh Steelers went 12-4. Bit of an interesting year for the Steelers. They started so strong. They didn't register their first loss till week 13, and then they ended up going 1-5 in their last 6 games, including their loss to the Browns on the first weekend of playoffs. So yeah, it's a tough one to judge really. If you just look at the record alone, it's a pretty solid year, but if you look at their season as a whole, it's pretty disappointing the way it ended. At one point they looked like challenging the Chiefs for the AFC. They were Super Bowl contenders, but then all of a sudden going 1-5 is not really great. They lost to the Bengals, they lost to Washington, and then Browns twice on the trot. So certainly things to improve on, mainly with the offense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It was pretty stagnant in a lot of the times. Not as extreme as the Chicago and Washington, but their defense was great and their offense needs improving. So those 3 teams are probably in a similar position. But their defense is just next level, isn't it? Their pass rush was number 1. Bud Dupree was great. TJ Watt was awesome. He made All-Pro. Cameron Hayward was great. He made the second team All-Pro. Minka Fitzpatrick made the All-Pro once again. So they've got an absolutely stacked defense. Now they just need to meet it on offense. Their receivers all showed glimpses at stages this year, but drops was a big issue for the Steelers. Ebron, Deontay Johnson, Juju, and Chase Claypool, I think there's potential there for that to be a really good receiving core. And I think next year they might kind of sprout into one of the league's best, but this year they were definitely below par in terms of what we expect from a Super Bowl challenging receiving core. Big Ben left a bit to be desired, especially in the back half of the year, but I think he was playing most of the year injured, if I'm honest. I think he was battling some serious injuries there. And then the running game for Pittsburgh was non-existent. They only registered above 100 rushing yards 6 times on the season, which is not ideal, especially when you're a team who's going to be ahead in most games. You're going to have a great defense that's going to shut out a lot of teams. You want to just be able to grind teams down and ground and pound like the Browns do, like the Titans do. So that's something they definitely need to fix in the offseason and maybe draft or pick up a running back in the future. But once again, we'll talk about that on the following NFL episode on draft needs. So yeah, it's a tough one to judge. I've actually predicted them to drop this year. I predicted them to come third. They still won the division, but it was very close in the end. In terms of out of 10, look, it's a tough one because, once again, as I said, the record doesn't quite match the feeling. So I'm going to give them I think record alone, it would be a 7 or an 8, but I think the way their season ended, it's got to be a 6 out of 10. Going 12-4 is certainly above average, so it's got to be above a 5, but just left a little bit to be desired, losing to Washington, Cincinnati, and then the Browns in back-to-back weeks. So, that was a pretty frustrating end to the year for the Steelers, but they'll be back next year. You can't really keep a team down with a defense and O-line like that, so they're going to be there once again next year, and I'm sure many years to come, but yeah, disappointing end to the season for the Steelers. Next, we've got the Los Angeles Rams. I feel like I say Los Angeles, pretty weird. I don't know how you say it. I actually predicted them to come last in their division. They ended up coming second behind Seattle. They went 10-6. They had some pretty solid scalps in the end. They beat the Seahawks 2 out of 3 times. They beat the Cardinals both times, and their drought against the 49ers continues. Kyle Shanahan seems to have Sean McVay in his back pocket. They went 0-2 there. They also beat the Bears. They came within a touchdown of the Bills, so they had some good results in there, but disappointingly went down in fairly easy fashion to the Packers on divisional weekend. Their defense was extraordinary. Once again, right up there with the best alongside the Steelers, I would say. Their pass rush was ranked 3rd. Their secondary was ranked number 1. Their O-line was awesome again, ranked 3rd. Obviously, we've heard the news that they've acquired Matthew Stafford. I'm really excited to see what that means for their team moving forward, but you think that's basically going to fix all their issues. They've got a good running back trio, spearheaded by Cam Akers now. They've got good receivers in Josh Reynolds, Cooper Kupp, and Robert Woods, and Higbee as well. So putting in a top-tier quarterback like Matthew Stafford, you have to think they're a solid contender next year. But looking at this year, Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey just solidified themselves as basically the best in their certain positions in the competition once again. Both went all-pro in their respective spots. Rams, out of 10... Look, it's a pretty impressive year, the fact that they went to the divisional weekend and I predicted them to come 4th. So I'm going to be pretty generous. I'm going to give them they only went 10-6. So I'll give them a 7 out of 10. They did make it out of the toughest division in football, or maybe the AFC North, but yeah, I'll pay it to the NFC West still. But they beat Seattle, big win there, but then they went pretty easily down to the Packers. I know it's a tough climate in Lambeau, but still disappointing there, but awesome defense and definitely improvements on offense, so it's exciting what they'll bring next year, but I'm going to give them a 7 out of 10. Next up, we've got the Baltimore Ravens. They had an interesting year. I keep saying that for most teams, but most of these sides actually did have a fairly interesting year. Crashed out on divisional weekend to the Buffalo Bills, only managed to put up 3. I think that game snowed, I can't remember exactly, but I predicted them to come 1st in the AFC North. They actually ended up coming 2nd, but they tied on record with the Cleveland Browns. They went 11-5, which is probably below what they wanted to go. They lost some interesting games, but they only really lost to good sides. They lost to the Patriots. That wasn't great, but that was like a monsoon, so that doesn't count. But they lost 2 games to the Steelers, and they lost to the Titans and Chiefs. So I think you can cop all those losses. So I don't think there's anything too disappointing on the year. Lamar Jackson probably didn't meet his 2019 levels, but it was always going to be pretty hard to when he started his young career so impressively. No one really had an outstanding year for them. Marlon Humphrey was pretty good at the cornerback position. I think he had 8 forced fumbles. Patrick Queen, the rookie linebacker, was pretty good. J.K. Dobbins finished the year well, but their receiving core is just a huge issue. It's similar to the Green Bay Packers. Well, the Packers have Devontae Adams, so I can't really compare it, but they just need weapons to give Lamar Jackson. We don't really know if Lamar can be a pocket quarterback yet, but that's also because he hasn't really been given the weapons, has he? Mark Andrews had a down year, I'd say, from last year. Marquise Brown was a big disappointment. I'll be honest, I don't really rate him. Everyone was ready for him to break out this year, and I didn't really think it was going to happen, and it didn't. And then no one else really stood up as a receiver for them. Willie Snead was probably their most impressive, and he's a journeyman now, so can't really be relying on him every year. But yeah, J.K. Dobbins was a bit of a highlight on the year. Their defense was still pretty good, but certainly disappointing. I think a lot of people predicted them to win the Super Bowl this year, and they didn't even get to the championship final, the conference finals weekend, which was disappointing from their point of view. In terms of out of 10, I'm probably going to give it a 5 out of 10. It's probably stiff to give someone making divisional weekend an average season, but based on how high our expectations were of the Ravens, I think it's fair. Next up, we've got the Cleveland Browns, who were the number 6 seed in the AFC. I predicted them to come second in their division. They came third, going 11-5. They had a pretty remarkable year in the end. People expected it last year for them to break out as a team that would just put 40 points up every week in the air, but they completely changed this year. They invested in the O-line. They drafted Jedrick Wills. They brought in Jack Conklin, who made the All-Pro team, and they just became a running powerhouse. They had over 100 rushing yards in all but 3 games. They had over 200 rushing yards on 5 occasions, I think. So pretty incredible the way they just grounded and pounded on teams. Ended up going down to the Chiefs by 5 points, which is nothing to scoff at. New coach Kevin Stefanski in his first year had a pretty impressive season. Their defense left a little bit to be desired. Could have been better in a lot of weeks, but Baker Mayfield definitely showed progression. It's going to be exciting if they get Odell Beckham back. I'm not sure if he's staying or what's happening there, but Jarvis Landry had a good year. People were starting to sprout like Donovan Peoples-Jones. Austin Hooper slowly was starting to fit in nicely, so definitely exciting time, but obviously their main stars are Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Absolutely ballers in terms of running the ball. Absolutely killed it all year. And out of 10, I'm going to be pretty kind. I think people were expecting them to be in the playoff picture, but to beat the Steelers in week 1 and then push the Chiefs to within a touchdown, I think it's got to be an 8 out of 10 for the Browns. Pretty impressive year for them. Myles Garrett continued his dominance and just continued to bully teams. Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller had great years in the O-line. And yeah, just a very impressive year all around for the Browns. Excited to see what they can offer next year. Next up, we have the New Orleans Saints. The New Orleans Saints had a pretty good year all around. They won the NFC South, which ended up being an impressive division. Them, the Buccaneers, jeweled it out for that division win. But the Saints ended up on top. I predicted them to come first. I actually predicted them to win the Super Bowl. I had them beating the Chiefs in a Drew Brees retirement win, but that didn't quite go to plan. They went down to the Buccaneers in the end on divisional weekend, which is frustrating given how well they did against them during the regular season. They had a pretty good year in terms of most areas on the field. Nothing really to pinpoint as a weakness. Their secondary at times struggled, but their pass rush kind of made up for that. And overall, their defense was pretty awesome. Blokes like Trey Hendrickson, Cam Jordan all had great years. Demario Davis made the All-Pro second team. And then on offense, Kamara was incredible once again. And Ryan Ramczyk, the right tackle, also made the All-Pro second team. The big question for the Saints moving forward is the quarterback spot. Drew Brees hasn't officially retired as of recording this, but it's expected that he will. Do they move forward with Taysom Hill, Jameis Winston? Do they draft someone? Do they bring someone in? So a lot to be watched out to watch out for there. Kamara and Latavius Murray made a pretty mean 1-2 running back duo though, especially towards the end of the year. They did pretty well when Drew Brees was injured, and even when he came back from injury, they looked pretty good, and I'm sure he was still injured when he came back. They lost a few disappointing games, one of note in week 2 against the Raiders, but that didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, did it? They lost to the Buccaneers, Tom Brady in the playoffs. It's tough to be disappointed at, but given how high their expectations were, I think we can say it was just an average season for the Saints. Yes, that's pretty rough, but I'm going to give them exactly a 5 out of 10. Similar to the Ravens, solid year, just compared to expectations, it was probably just exactly par for me. Pretty stiff to give them only a 5 out of 10, going 12-4 and being the number 2 seed in the NFC, but I had very high hopes for the Saints this year, and I thought they were going to win it, but they ended up being quite a fair way off in the end, thanks to Tom Brady and his January magic. Next up, we have the Green Bay Packers, the number 1 seed in the NFC. They received the bye in the first week of playoffs. Thought it was going to be a huge help. It was against the Rams, not so much against the Buccaneers. Aaron Rodgers went down to Tom Brady, which is kind of a story of his career, really. Always been second to Tom Brady in terms of quarterback GOAT chat. He's likely going to win the MVP. Hasn't been announced yet, but everyone's expecting it. I awarded him my MVP. But he had another stellar year, made the All-Pro first team, along with Davante Adams, David Bakhtiari, Corey Linsley, and Jair Alexander and Zadarius Smith made the second team. The secondary for the Packers had a great year. Blokes like Savage, Jair Alexander, and King absolutely killed it. Their pass rush wasn't as dominant as last year, but Zadarius Smith had another cracking year. Their O-line was awesome once again. Their offense, you can't even fault it. They put up 35 plus points most weeks. It's just basically a situation with the Packers of how do they get over the final hurdle. 2 years in a row losing the NFC Conference Final, pretty frustrating, especially when most of their team is kind of in their prime and Matt LaFleur is coaching his socks off basically. Rodgers is throwing his socks off, Adams is catching his socks off, Jones is running his socks off, but they just couldn't get it done once again. It's pretty frustrating because I think this was a year where a team as established as the Packers could have really capitalised, because there was a lot of teams who were a bit underdone during the season, but the Packers were kind of just the same team as last year. So that's definitely disappointing. To go down to the Buccaneers, who they would have backed themselves against, also probably adds extra sting to the wound. But yeah, look, pretty disappointing year in the end. The fact that they lost in the same spot they did. Out of 10, once again, I'm going to be brutal, but I'm probably only going to give them a 6 out of 10. In terms of the regular season, you've got to say that's an above average performance, but their playoff dreams were crushed once again, same weekend as last year, so that's certainly bringing their score down, so I'm going to be harsh and give them only a 6 out of 10. Interesting to see where they go from here. People are saying Rodgers is going to leave, but I'm not sure about that, but we'll obviously address that when we get to it. Next up, we've got the Buffalo Bills, the other team who lost on conference finals weekend. They lost to the Kansas City Chiefs after beating the Colts and Ravens in back-to-back wins in the playoffs. I think it was a pretty successful year for the Bills. I predicted that I was bigger on the Bills this year after a pretty impressive year last year. Josh Allen took another step in the right direction. He is becoming quickly... I don't know if he's a top 5 quarterback just yet, but he's certainly in the conversation now. Stephon Diggs looked to be a master stroke of a pickup. He was one of the best wide receivers in the year. Cole Beasley, who expected that? He had a killing year. Tre'Davious White had a pretty good year. He started slow, came home strong. Their defense was good once again. Similar to White, it started slowly. They shipped a few big scores. But then come the end of the year, they were well and truly the Bills of 2019 again in defense. Their O-line was impressive. Their whole offense was impressive. Probably lacked a running game at times. Quite often they struggled to rush for more than 100 yards, especially in the postseason. They went sub 100 in both playoff games that they won, which you wouldn't expect in a playoff game in the cold of January. But Zach Moss looks to be their main man going forward in terms of the running game. Josh Allen looks to be their main man in terms of the passing game. So they've got all the pieces there. It's just about bringing it together, maybe adding a few pieces here or there this year to make them go to the next level. But out of 10, I think it's got to be... I'm actually going to give them a 9 out of 10. I think if they made the Super Bowl, it would have been a 10 out of 10 season for the Bills, but just fell short at the final hurdle. But to Reid and Mahomes, you can't really fault that. So 9 out of 10 for the Bills. Very happy. I'm a big fan of the Bills. Like their work, like the way they go about their business, and they had a pretty impressive year. Now that leads us on to the Super Bowl contenders, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, their season is going to be sculpted by what happens on Monday or Sunday in America. It's obviously can change a season if you win or lose the Super Bowl, but I'm going to discuss how I rank their seasons if they win or lose. The Buccaneers, I was actually pretty low on them in the preseason. I wasn't buying into the hype. I thought it was going to be another Cleveland Browns of 2019. I thought it was too much to ask of them to gel with the new quarterback-coach combo, but Tom Brady showed his magic through for, I think, the third most passing yards in the competition, really wound back the clock with some of his long-distance throws, and by the end of the year, they were just putting up points. They put up 48 against Denver, 56 against Miami, 34 against the Niners, 38 against the Patriots. They were just taking the piss. And yeah, that receiving core is just irresistible, really. When Scotty Miller's your wide receiver 4, if you aren't including the tight ends, that's pretty crazy to think how deadly that is. But their defense was once again probably their most valuable piece, I'd have to say. Secondary finished ranked 6th, the D-line, pass rush 8th, O-line finished 5th. So all aspects of the Buccaneers team had a pretty good year. Nothing really to fault. Ronald Jones was really impressive at times. Leonard Fournette was really impressive at times. And yeah, there's not really much to say negative towards the Buccaneers. It's pretty impressive how quickly they gelled. It only took them 6 or 7 weeks to really start moving into 4th or 5th gear. Devin White, Levante David had outstanding years in the linebacker spot. Both made the second All-Pro team. Out of 10, I'm going to give them a 9 out of 10. Actually, I'm going to give them a 10 out of 10. I think even if they lose to the Chiefs in a Super Bowl, I think it's an outstanding season from then. I think most others might look at them as an 8 or 9 out of 10, but just how low I predicted them. I actually expected the Falcons to beat them. So I'm definitely been impressed by their year, and I think a 10 out of 10 is worthy. Incredible year from the Buccaneers. And then finally, the Kansas City Chiefs. Exactly who we expected to be the AFC contender for the Super Bowl. Predicted them to come first in the AFC West, obviously. They went 14-2, pretty impressive. Their defense, similar to last year, wasn't outstanding, but stood up in the important moments. Oh, my bad. I just realized I was reading out Tampa Bay Buccaneers scores. I was reading out Buffalo Bills scores for the Tampa Bay there. But I'll read out a few then. They put up 47 against Detroit, 44 against Atlanta, 46 against the Panthers, just to name a few. So that's pretty impressive. And then, back to the Chiefs, my bad. Their O-line was good once again. Their defense was pretty solid, stood up when it counted. But, hard to not really mention Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid when you talk about the Chiefs. Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce had outstanding years once again, both making the All-Pro team. Tyrann Mathieu made it, which I can't lie, would like a DRS on that selection, but he is a bit of a big-time player, so fair enough. Chris Jones also made the second team. But yeah, Mahomes had an incredible year. He got pipped by Aaron Rodgers for the All-Pro team, but he's likely going to be the second in the MVP race, which is very impressive once again. No mean feat being the second best player in a sport in the world. But yeah, him and Andy Reid are just an unstoppable force, really. And good luck to the Buccaneers trying to stop them on Sunday. It'll be interesting to see if they can. If there's anyone who can, it would be Tom Brady, Bruce Arians, and the defense of Todd Bowles. They are pretty incredible, but I don't think it's anything that Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid can't dissect. In terms of out of 10, I think their rating matters if they win a Super Bowl. I'm going to give it a 9 out of 10 if they don't win, a 10 out of 10 if they win. Very hard to go back-to-back in the NFL with so many teams in the competition in such a short season, but if they can go back-to-back definitely incredible feat worthy of a 10 out of 10. But if they don't, I'm just going to give it a 9 out of 10. Still an incredible year, don't get me wrong, but just a little bit of a disappointment, I'd say, stumbling at the final hurdle when everyone had kind of penciled them in from week 2 onwards as being Super Bowl winners. So yeah, that's my wrap. Obviously, going to be interested in what happens on Sunday in the Super Bowl on and off the field. The weekend performing at the halftime show, I believe. Looking forward to that one. I'm actually going to be at the tennis during the game, which is very interesting. I can't lie, a bit of an oversight from me when I booked my tennis tickets, but I do love the Australian Open. So excited to see who comes out the winner. Happy for either of these teams to win, to be honest. I think both deserve it. Both had incredible years, and looking forward to the off-season as well. Very excited to see how all the trades and free agency play out. It's been an incredible year of NFL. Once again, it's roped me in even further. The last 2 years, I've just become an absolute diehard, waking up at like 5 a.m. and all sorts of ridiculous stuff to follow the sport. I've really enjoyed covering it on the podcast this year. I've enjoyed the fantasy aspects of it as well, and looking forward to producing. Well, I hope we're still producing podcast content when the season rolls around next year. We'll have to wait and see, because I'm not sure how. Well, I hope I'm still committed, but we'll wait and see. You never know what will happen with me. But yeah, really enjoyed it. Thanks for everyone who's tuned into any of the NFL content this year on the 2020 season. Leave a comment below if you think any of my rankings and ratings were harsh or wrong. Let me know which ones you think were wrong and what they should have been. Let me know what you think of the Matthew Stafford trade as well. I've been having a few chats and debates with mates about that one. Excited to hear what you guys think of that. And yeah, good luck to the Buccaneers. Good luck to the Chiefs. Not that they're listening. I'm sure they are actually big fans of the On The Ball podcast. And I'll catch you guys next time.